The sun dipped low behind the trees in East Elm Park, casting long golden streaks over the playground. Laughter and voices filled the air as families enjoyed the last moments of the warm spring day. Among them were two girls, identical twins, Amara and Amina Bennett. Their dark brown curls bouncing as they raced toward the swings. They were 11 years old, inseparable, full of energy and dreams too big for their tiny bodies. They had just finished their ice cream cones, chatting about the latest book their teacher had assigned and who could swing higher without falling. To them, the park was a place of freedom, a refuge where being a child still felt safe. That illusion was shattered in a matter of minutes. Officer Brad Keller cruised his patrol car past the park. His eyes narrowed when he saw the twins sitting on a bench, giggling and rifling through a paper bag. A nearby corner store had been broken into earlier that week, and in Brad's mind, two young black girls alone in the park with a suspicious bag equaled trouble. He didn't ask himself why he felt that way. He didn't pause to consider their age or innocence. He simply saw black. The car screeched as he pulled up on the curb and stepped out, hand already resting on his holstered weapon. The girls looked up, startled. "You two, get over here. What are you doing with that bag?" he barked. Amara flinched. "It's just our lunch," she said, her voice barely audible. "Don't lie to me. Stand up, hands where I can see them." People nearby froze. A mother holding her toddler stopped mid-step. A jogger slowed to watch. But no one intervened. Amina stepped protectively in front of her sister, trembling. "We didn't do anything," she said, her eyes wide with fear. But Brad didn't listen. He marched over, grabbed Amina by the arm, and yanked her forward. She stumbled, scraped her knee, and let out a small cry. Amara gasped, reaching out, only to be shoved backward. Her head struck the edge of the bench. "What the hell is going on?" someone shouted. A bystander, a man with a phone, began filming. But the damage was already done. Brad stood there, looming over two crying children, lips curled with suspicion, eyes burning with anger he couldn't even justify. The moment dragged in suffocating silence until backup arrived. Another officer, younger, looked from the girls to Brad and said, "Sir, they're just kids." Brad's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. They were being evasive. "I thought they had stolen property." But he couldn't explain why he thought that. An ambulance was called. Paramedics treated Amara's bleeding scalp and Amina's swollen arm. The crowd that had formed now murmured angrily. The phone video would soon explode online. But in that moment, all Amara and Amina could do was hold each other and cry. They hadn't stolen anything. They had only been playing. Malcolm Bennett sat in his office on the top floor of City Hall, finalizing a speech about community investment and summer education programs when his phone buzzed. It was his wife, Camille. Her voice trembled. "Malcolm. The girls. They've been hurt. A cop. In the park. You need to come to the hospital." Time stopped. He barely remembered the drive over. Only that his hands shook and his throat burned. When he arrived at the emergency room and saw his daughters, his beautiful, brave daughters, covered in bruises and tears, something inside him broke. Amara clung to Camille's hand, her head wrapped in gauze. Amina sat silently, staring at the floor, her arm in a sling. When they saw him, they burst into tears. Malcolm held them both, trembling as hard as they were. "What happened?" he demanded. Camille told him everything. The officer's name, the accusations, the video. At first, Malcolm couldn't believe it. He knew racism. He'd fought against it his entire career. But never had it reached so close to home. Never had it laid its hands on his children. He kissed their foreheads, smoothed their hair, and whispered, "Daddy's here. You're safe now." But his face was stone when he stood up. "I want the name of the officer," he said. "He's already been placed on administrative leave." A hospital staffer offered gently. Malcolm turned, voice low and dangerous. "That's not enough." He left the hospital with rage in his veins and a fire behind his eyes. A father had been wounded, and the mayor of the city was preparing for war. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Shared on Facebook, retweeted across Twitter, dissected on TikTok, aired on the morning news. Millions watched as Officer Brad Keller yanked a small black girl by the arm, pushed her sister to the ground, and accused them of theft without evidence. Comment sections boiled with anger. "They're children. This is why we march. Fire him. Arrest him." And under it all, One name echoed. Amara and Amina Bennett. People soon discovered who their father was. The hashtag justice for the Bennett twins trended worldwide. Protesters gathered outside the police department. Media vans swarmed outside City Hall. Inside, Malcolm sat with his advisors. Half of them begged him to tread carefully. Let the investigation play out. You're the mayor, not a vigilante. But the other half, especially the young, progressive voices, urged him to speak. That evening, Malcolm held a press conference. His voice was calm, measured, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. My daughters were attacked by someone sworn to protect them. That is not just a family matter. That is a city matter. That is an American matter. The room erupted in applause. Reporters clamored for more, but Malcolm raised a hand. We will not allow fear, bias, or prejudice to dictate how our children are treated in our streets. I will demand a full, independent investigation, and let me be clear, justice will be served. The crowd roared, but somewhere in a darkened office across town, Brad Keller sat watching the same press conference. His lips twisted in disgust. This is political, he muttered. He's just trying to ruin me. He had no idea what storm was coming. Behind the closed doors of the mayor's residence, Malcolm paced late into the night. He stared out the window as city lights twinkled, heart weighed down by more than the burden of fatherhood. Camille sat quietly on the couch, holding a mug of tea. Watching him. You're not just a father in this, Malcolm. You're the mayor. You're the symbol of this city's conscience. I know, he whispered. And that's the problem. He'd worked hard to maintain balance in a divided city. He'd fought to build trust across communities. He'd appointed a new police commissioner to reform outdated practices. But now his own children had become victims of the very system he'd tried to change. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope. Speak too strongly, and he risked backlash from law enforcement unions, political rivals, and donors. Speak too weakly, and he would betray his own blood. Camille approached and placed a hand on his chest. You're not alone in this. And you don't have to choose between being a father and being a leader. You can be both. Her words settled over him like a bomb. He sat down and pulled her close. I'm going to fight this. But I'm going to do it the right way. Not just for our girls, for every child who has to live in fear. Camille kissed his cheek. Then let's get to work. In the room next door, Amara and Amina slept side by side, arms intertwined, unaware of the awakening storm, unaware that their pain had sparked a movement far bigger than themselves. Brad Keller sat alone in his small, dimly lit kitchen, fingers tapping against the ceramic coffee mug he hadn't touched in an hour. The silence inside his home was thick. On the television behind him, his own face flashed again, pulled from the now viral video. The words, "under investigation," blinking across the bottom of the screen. The volume was low, but the weight of it was deafening. He felt cornered, betrayed, misunderstood. To Brad, it wasn't about race, it never had been. He told himself, it was about keeping the streets safe. About doing what needed to be done. That's what he was taught when he first joined the force. Over a decade ago, you make split-second decisions. You go with your gut. And his gut, more often than not, told him to be suspicious of black and brown kids. But now, everything was changing, fast. His phone buzzed with calls and messages, some from fellow officers pledging quiet support. Others from old drinking buddies who told him to lay low, that it would all blow over. But nothing felt certain anymore. A part of him was scared. Another part, an uglier, more stubborn part, was defiant. At the precinct, Internal Affairs had started digging into his file. What they found wasn't encouraging. Over the years, there had been at least 9 complaints filed against Officer Keller. Most for excessive force or racially motivated behavior. None had led to formal discipline. All had been dismissed or quietly buried under mounds of paperwork and the blue wall of silence. But now, the scrutiny was public. Detective Elaine Rhodes had been assigned to monitor the case. She was new to the Internal Affairs Unit, one of the youngest members and one of the few women, while others in the department approached the Keller case like a political hot potato. She approached it with laser-sharp focus. She didn't care who he was. She cared what he did. And what she saw in the footage chilled her. She requested Keller's body cam footage from the incident. But it was conveniently malfunctioning. She raised an eyebrow. That was the 3rd time in his career a body cam failed at the worst possible moment. Something wasn't right, and Detective Rhodes was going to find out what. The streets of the city swelled with bodies. Protesters carried signs that read, "Protect our children," "Accountability now," and "Justice for the Bennett twins." They marched from the park to City Hall, singing, chanting, and demanding that the system answer for the scars etched on two innocent girls. What started as a local protest quickly became a national rallying cry. Civil rights leaders flew in. News outlets from around the country parked their vans outside Malcolm's office. Social media was ablaze. Athletes wore shirts bearing the twins' names. Celebrities tweeted messages of support. Yet, for every message of solidarity, there was also backlash. Thinly veiled racism flooded online comment sections. Anonymous threats trickled into the mayor's inbox. Conservative talk radio called it a political witch hunt, and painted Officer Keller as a scapegoat for a city teetering on the edge of chaos. Inside the police department, tensions reached a breaking point. Some officers felt betrayed, fearing they'd be punished for doing their jobs. Others quietly admitted that Keller had always made them uncomfortable. In the eye of this storm stood Malcolm. He sat at his desk, hands steepled, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He'd already begun drafting reforms, body cam mandates, community oversight boards, retraining programs, but nothing felt like enough. Not yet. Camille urged him to hold a town hall. Let the people see you. Not as a politician, as a father, as a man who's hurting. He agreed. At the town hall, Malcolm stepped onto the stage in a packed community center. There was no podium, no teleprompter, just a microphone and a trembling voice. "I never imagined standing here like this. Not as your mayor, but as a father who watched his children cry themselves to sleep for nights on end because someone sworn to protect them treated them like criminals." He paused. The room was silent. This is not just about Amara and Amina. This is about a system that's allowed fear to become policy. This is about a culture that confuses authority with cruelty. And I promise you, change is coming. Applause broke out. Tears followed. And for the first time in days, hope flickered. Detective Elaine Rhodes sat in front of a flickering monitor, headphones in her ears, watching surveillance footage from nearby security cameras around the park. No sound, just grainy images, but what she saw confirmed everything. The twins had been laughing, eating, harmless, no sign of theft, no sign of wrongdoing. And then, Officer Keller's car pulled up. She rewound the footage, watching his body language, agitated from the start. There was no indication that he had seen a crime committed. Just assumption. That was his first act of violence. Elaine printed the footage, timestamped it, and filed it carefully. Then she opened his disciplinary history. She noted the patterns. A black teenager wrongfully detained in 2018. A Hispanic man tackled at a bus stop in 2019. A homeless woman pepper sprayed without provocation. All swept under the rug. She stared at the documents for a long time. This was systemic, and it went deeper than Brad Keller. Later that day, she requested a formal interview with Keller. He arrived wearing mirrored sunglasses and an unearned smirk. His attorney spoke for him most of the time. But when Elaine asked, "Why did you approach the girls that day?" he finally replied, "They looked like trouble." Elaine wrote it down, word for word. When she returned to her office, she knew she had a decision to make. She could write a neutral report that would keep her job safe. Or she could write the truth. She chose the truth, and sent it straight to the mayor's office. In a quiet, smoky bar on the edge of the city, 4 men sat in a corner booth. Off-duty cops, veterans, loyalists. They spoke in hushed voices, watching the protest coverage on a muted television. One of them, a lieutenant named Briggs, shook his head. "They're making Keller a sacrifice. Throwing one of our own to the wolves." Another nodded. "That mayor's turning this department into a circus. Something needs to be done." The third muttered. The fourth leaned in. "I've got a guy at IT. Says Keller's footage is still retrievable. But if we don't act fast, someone's going to leak it, and if it's what I think it is, it won't help him." They clinked glasses. A pact was made in silence. Later that night, Keller received a message on an encrypted phone: "Sit tight. We'll handle it." Meanwhile, at City Hall, Malcolm read Detective Rhodes' report. He sat in silence afterward, the words echoing in his head, a pattern of racial bias reinforced by systemic tolerance. Camille entered the room, setting a cup of coffee beside him. "What now?" He looked at her. Then at the photo of their daughters framed on his desk. Now we prepare for war. Rain pattered softly against the windows of the Bennett home. Inside, the air felt still, weighted by everything that had happened over the past week. Amara had become quieter, more withdrawn, often staring into space during dinner, while Amina had grown restless. She scribbled constantly in her notebooks, filling pages with questions no one had answers to, with thoughts that buzzed too loudly in her head to keep trapped inside. One evening, Amina sat cross-legged on her bed, her tablet in front of her. The blank screen waited, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling at first. Then, with a deep breath, she began to type. She wrote about the day in the park, not just the fear or the pain, but the confusion. She wrote about the way the officer looked at her, like she was something dangerous, something broken before he even spoke a word. She described how it felt to be shoved when she had done nothing wrong. But more than that, she wrote about the silence that followed, the silence of neighbors, of bystanders, of a world too used to looking away. By the time she finished, tears streaked down her face. She read it aloud to herself once, then walked into the living room where her parents sat. "I want people to hear me," she said. Malcolm looked up, surprised. Camille's eyes softened. "What do you mean, sweetheart? I want to post this. Not just the video. Not what they say happened. What I say happened. What I felt." Camille moved to her daughter's side, reading the words on the screen. As she did, her hands slowly moved to her chest. Malcolm leaned forward and read silently. Then he looked at Amina, his voice hoarse. "Are you sure?" Amina nodded. "I need them to know I'm not just a victim in someone else's story. I have my own voice." The next morning, her letter was posted to Malcolm's official social media account with a note, "From my daughter. Amina, please read her words." It was shared tens of thousands of times in a matter of hours. Teachers read it aloud in classrooms. Newscasters quoted it on television. Even politicians from neighboring cities praised its clarity and raw truth. A child's voice, soft but fierce, had pierced through the noise of politics, law, and outrage. And in doing so, Amina became more than a name in a headline. She became a symbol. Detective Elaine Rhodes stared at the folder on her desk. Inside were pieces that didn't quite add up, bodycam logs that had been tampered with, internal timestamps that didn't match the patrol schedule, and one curious detail. Officer Keller had arrived at the park 3 minutes after a routine call was logged about suspicious activity. Yet there was no corresponding 911 audio. Someone had created a false report, a paper trail to justify a confrontation that never should have happened. She sat back in her chair, overwhelmed but focused. Her fingers moved quickly over her keyboard, diving into the precinct's internal server. The deeper she went, the more dirt she found. Records of complaints against Keller had been redacted, not by standard procedure, but manually edited. Someone had worked hard to protect him. Too hard. She picked up her phone and dialed Mayor Bennett's office. The assistant answered. "This is Detective Rhodes. I need to speak with him. Urgently." Malcolm was in the middle of a budget meeting when he got the call. The moment he heard her voice, he excused himself and locked the door to his office. Elaine didn't waste time. "I found a forged 911 call. The department's digital records were altered, and bodycam data shows clear inconsistencies. This was a cover-up." Malcolm's voice was low and tight. "How far up does it go?" "I'm still tracing it," she said, "but it's not just Keller. This rot goes deeper. Someone high-ranking tried to bury the past, and they're still trying to control the narrative." There was silence on the line. Then Malcolm spoke. "Send me everything. And be careful. You're playing with fire now." Elaine nodded, already encrypting files and preparing copies. She knew she was being watched. Her office door had been found ajar the night before. Papers slightly shifted, like someone had searched without stealing. As she hit send, she whispered to herself, "Let's see them try to hide this now." The Bennett home no longer felt like home. There were security guards stationed outside, a camera installed above the front door, and a constant stream of calls, emails, and messages that ranged from love to venom. Camille received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a picture of their daughters with a note that read, "This is what happens when you open your mouth." She locked herself in the bathroom for 20 minutes, trying to calm her hands enough to dial Malcolm. He came home early that night. The girls weren't told the full story. but they could sense the change. Amara stopped riding her bike outside. Amina kept the curtains drawn. At night, Camille would lie awake next to her husband, feeling him toss and turn. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked one evening, her voice barely more than breath. Malcolm stared at the ceiling. "What's the alternative? Stay silent? Let it happen to someone else's children next time?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he whispered. "But I'm more scared of the world they'll grow up in if we don't fight back." At school, the twins faced whispers and stares. Some classmates offered kindness, but others echoed their parents' prejudices. One day, a boy muttered, "Your dad's ruining the police. My uncle says your family's full of troublemakers." Amara ran to the bathroom in tears. Amina followed and held her sister tightly, whispering, "We're not the problem, they are." But despite the pain, the Bennetts refused to bend. Camille joined community mothers to form a support group for families who'd faced police abuse. Malcolm created a scholarship fund in his daughters' names. They pushed forward, even when it hurt. They knew that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant refusing to be silent. In the corner of the precinct's locker room, Officer Miguel Ortiz sat silently, lacing up his boots, his eyes fixed on the ground. He had been there the day of the park incident, just arriving on a different call when he heard the commotion. He had seen Keller's aggressive stance, the fear in the girl's eyes, and most of all, the casual way Brad brushed it off afterward, laughing about how the little brats needed a scare. Miguel had wanted to speak up. He always told himself he'd be the kind of cop who made a difference. But speaking up in a place like this? That was dangerous. The department had grown colder since the protests. Whispers filled the halls, loyalty tests disguised as casual conversations. "Do you think Keller really did anything wrong?" someone would ask. "The mayor's going too far, isn't he?" It was hard to know who to trust. One afternoon, Miguel found himself in the break room with Captain Briggs, the same man who'd helped cover Keller's tracks before. Briggs poured a cup of coffee and said, "Funny how one little incident can make the whole force look bad." "Huh? Like none of us do our jobs anymore." Miguel nodded, saying nothing. Briggs leaned in. "If you ever get asked anything about that day, just remember, it was chaos. You didn't really see anything. You just heard shouting. That's all." Miguel's stomach twisted. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, watching the footage of Amina's letter being read aloud on television. Her words struck him in a place he didn't expect, a place buried deep beneath the badge and the silence. He picked up his phone, stared at it for a long time. Then he called the mayor's office. "My name is Officer Miguel Ortiz," he said when the assistant answered. "I have something I need to say about the Keller case." And just like that, the first crack in the wall of silence spread. Miguel Ortiz sat across from Malcolm Bennett in a quiet, private meeting room on the top floor of City Hall. The air was thick with unease. Miguel's police badge sat on the table between them like a fragile object about to shatter. Malcolm watched him carefully, knowing the risk this man had taken just by being here. Miguel cleared his throat, his voice gravelly and strained. "I was there that day. In the park. Not from the start. But I saw enough. I saw the way Keller looked at them. Like they didn't belong. Like they were dangerous." Malcolm didn't speak, letting him continue. He didn't talk to them like kids. He didn't give them a chance. When they flinched, he seemed satisfied, like he'd confirmed what he already believed. Miguel exhaled shakily and looked away for a moment before adding, "I should have spoken up earlier. I didn't. I was afraid of what it would mean for my career. I was wrong." Malcolm nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth. What you've done here today, it matters." Within 24 hours, Miguel's testimony was documented, verified, and folded into the official investigation. Elaine Rhodes, already piecing together a web of cover-ups and corrupt communication logs, now had a living witness to bolster the case. At the next press conference, Malcolm stood at the podium flanked by civil rights attorneys, leaders from local churches, and Miguel himself, who had agreed, nervously but resolutely, to speak publicly. Miguel took the microphone, heart thudding in his ears. He looked out at the sea of flashing cameras, raised phones, and hopeful faces. "I joined the force to protect people," he began, "but protecting means standing up. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. I saw what Officer Keller did. And I know that silence is complicity. I won't be silent anymore." The room erupted in applause. For the first time since the incident, The police department's own uniform had been used not to defend injustice, but to challenge it. That night, the city buzzed with a different energy. Protests turned into vigils. The anger remained, but now it mingled with something stronger. Momentum. Inside the grand chamber of the county courthouse, the room fell silent as the grand jury foreperson stood, holding a single sheet of paper. The judge, old and stern, peered over his glasses and asked the question that would define the city's next chapter. Has the grand jury reached a decision in the matter of Officer Bradley Keller? The foreperson nodded. We have, Your Honor. The indictment was read aloud. Assault and battery of a minor. Use of excessive force. And violation of civil rights under color of law. Each charge hit the courtroom like a drumbeat. Brad Keller sat stiff in his chair, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. But it was clear from his face, shock had given way to something more primal. Panic. Outside, hundreds of people gathered, eyes glued to the livestream broadcast on a massive screen in the square. When the final charge was announced, a wave of cheers and tears erupted. Malcolm stood beside Camille and the girls, arms wrapped around them protectively as the crowd surged in emotion. But not everyone celebrated. The police union held its own press conference that night, denouncing the indictment as politically motivated. Conservative pundits framed the trial as an attack on law enforcement. And behind closed doors, there were whispers of retaliation, leaks, smear campaigns, and quiet efforts to undermine the mayor's office. Still, the indictment marked a line in the sand. For the first time in the city's modern history, a police officer would be held criminally responsible for harming black children. The message was clear. Authority does not grant immunity. And no one, not even those with a badge, was above the law. Malcolm knew the real battle lay ahead. But as he watched his daughters fall asleep that night, heads nestled together on the couch, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Justice was no longer a dream. It had become a fight worth winning. The trial of Officer Brad Keller opened on a rainy Monday morning. Journalists lined the courthouse steps before dawn. Protesters and counter-protesters stood on opposite sidewalks, their chants colliding like thunder. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The judge, a black woman known for her unwavering fairness, presided with calm authority. The prosecution opened with the video footage and Amina's letter, establishing the emotional and factual foundation. Then came the evidence, the altered 911 records, the failed body cam conveniently turned off, and a long trail of past misconduct. Amina and Amara were called to testify on the second day. They were nervous, small in the oversized wooden witness stand, but determined. Amina went first. She took a deep breath and met the eyes of every juror. I was scared, she said, her voice clear but soft. I didn't know what we did wrong. We were just playing. But when he looked at us, it was like he already decided we were bad. A hush fell over the room. The defense tried to rattle her, asking why she didn't comply faster, why she didn't explain what they were doing. We didn't know we had to explain playing. She replied, we're kids. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the stenographer blinked, as if those words had landed deeper than expected. When Amara testified, she cried quietly as she spoke of hitting her head on the bench and the way the officer yelled. Malcolm and Camille held each other's hands tightly, their hearts breaking all over again. By the end of the week, public sentiment had shifted further. Amina and Amara weren't just symbols anymore. They were children, real, hurting, brave children. The jury saw them, and so did the world. On the sixth day of the trial, Brad Keller took the stand. He wore a suit too large for his frame and a grim expression that couldn't quite mask his inner turmoil. His lawyer had coached him endlessly, stick to procedure. Don't lose control. Paint yourself as a man doing his duty in a complicated situation. But Brad had spent too many nights alone, too many days hearing his name smeared across the airwaves. And as the prosecutor pressed him, layer by layer, the mask began to slip. Do you recall the moment you made physical contact with the children? The prosecutor asked. I do. Why did you approach them in the first place? They matched a vague description. I thought they might have stolen something. Did you see them steal something? No. Did they run? No. Did they threaten you? No. The silence in the room stretched tight. The prosecutor leaned in. So why did you treat them like criminals? Brad's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the jury. Toward Malcolm. Toward the girls. They looked like they might do something. And what made you think that? Silence. Finally, Brad looked down and whispered, I don't know. I just felt it. The prosecutor let the words hang. Officer Keller, he said slowly, what you felt was not suspicion. It was prejudice. Brad's jaw clenched. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't mean. But you did. You hurt them. And you've hurt this city. Brad's voice cracked. I didn't ask for this. I've been a good cop. I did what I was trained to do. The judge leaned forward. Then perhaps it's time we ask how we're training our officers. In that moment, Brad Keller crumbled, not just under the weight of his guilt, but under the realization that his world was never built on justice. It was built on fear. And power. And the silence of people who knew better but said nothing. The court adjourned for the day. Outside, the city waited for a verdict. Inside, a reckoning had already begun. The city held its breath. On the 14th day of the trial, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Reporters elbowed for space behind the glass. Spectators leaned forward in their chairs. And Malcolm Bennett sat in the front row, holding Camille's hand in one palm and the girls' palms in the other. Amara and Amina wore matching lavender sweaters, their braids adorned with beads that clicked softly when they moved their heads. Everyone was waiting. The jurors filed in slowly, their faces unreadable. A hush swept over the room, the kind that feels alive, thick with tension, heavy with hope and dread. The judge cleared her throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman with silver streaks in her hair, stood up with a sheet in her hands. Her voice was strong, but her hands trembled. We have, Your Honor. She read each count one by one. Count 1. Guilty. Count 2. Guilty. Count 3. Guilty. Brad Keller's face drained of color. He didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He simply sat still, as if his body had turned to stone. Behind him, one of his former colleagues let out a breath and hung his head. Gasps and cries filled the courtroom. Some wept openly. Others clasped hands or bowed their heads in silent prayer. The judge banged her gavel and announced sentencing would take place in 2 weeks. But for that moment, no one cared about the sentence. The people had heard the truth. The people had been believed. Justice, for once, had spoken in the voice of the powerless. Outside, crowds erupted in cheers. Car horns blared in rhythm. And signs waved like flags of a hard-fought revolution. It wasn't just about 2 little girls anymore, it was about a reckoning. A shift. Malcolm knelt down and wrapped his arms around his daughters. Amina looked up at him with teary eyes and whispered, Is it over? He shook his head softly. No, baby, he said, but now, we can begin. The days that followed were unlike anything the city had ever seen. There were celebrations in the streets. Yes, but they were not wild or vengeful. They were careful, intentional, reverent. Community centers held vigils. Choirs sang under the night sky. People stood shoulder to shoulder, black, white, Latino, Asian, lighting candles for the children who had suffered silently for generations. And for the first time, those flames refused to go out. Malcolm convened a citywide summit on policing and justice. Experts, educators, activists, and even former officers were invited to speak. Detective Elaine Rhodes gave a passionate speech about institutional culture and the cost of silence. Officer Miguel Ortiz led a workshop on ethical policing and how to speak up when others won't. A new Office of Civil Oversight was established with independent authority to investigate misconduct. Body cam footage would now be archived off-site, accessible to the public. Training programs were rewritten to include history, empathy, and conflict de-escalation. Old policies were torn down. New ones rose in their place. But the deepest healing happened in neighborhoods. Amara and Amina returned to school and were welcomed with hugs, art projects, and letters from children around the country. Some students admitted they hadn't understood racism before. Others asked to sit with them at lunch just to say thank you. Camille founded a foundation in their daughters' names to support families affected by police violence. It began with just a small office and 2 volunteers. Within weeks, it had raised enough money to hire lawyers for 5 ongoing cases and provide counseling for a dozen children. The mayor's mansion became a meeting place for mothers. Once a symbol of political distance, it now echoed with the laughter of children, the rustle of notebooks, and the soft but powerful sounds of healing. Still, Malcolm knew the work wasn't finished. Healing wasn't linear, and justice wasn't permanent. But he had seen a spark, one lit by the courage of two young girls. And that spark had become a flame. Late one evening, the Bennett family sat curled on the living room couch, sharing popcorn and watching an old documentary about the civil rights movement. Amina rested her head on Camille's shoulder, while Amara sat with her legs folded beneath her, eyes wide with curiosity. When the credits rolled, Amara turned to her father. "Do you think I could be a lawyer?" she asked. Malcolm looked at her. "Do I think you could? I think you were born for it." She smiled, almost shyly. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way we did. I want to help people speak when no one listens." Camille brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "You already are." Amara began writing speeches in her journal, practicing debates with Amina, reading books about justice, law, and people who had changed the world with only their voices. At a school assembly the following week, Amara stood at the microphone. The gym was packed, the lights too bright, but she didn't shake. Her voice rang clear. "My name is Amara Bennett. I'm 11 years old. Some people say I'm too young to understand things like justice or equality. But I remember how it felt to be treated like a criminal for no reason. I remember the fear. And now, I remember the power of being believed." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "Someday, I want to be a civil rights lawyer. I want to help people who feel small remember that their voice is big. I want to make change, not just because of what happened to me, but because of what happens to kids like me every day." The applause shook the walls. That night, Amara received dozens of letters from students and teachers, from strangers who said she reminded them of the heroes they'd read about in school. In her bedroom, beneath a hand-drawn sign that read, "Future Lawyer," Amara wrote back to every single one of them. Because she knew this wasn't about becoming famous. It was about never being invisible again. The sun rose gently over the city. On the anniversary of the park incident, a new mural was unveiled at East Elm Park. It showed two young girls holding hands, bathed in golden light, surrounded by the words, "We see you. We hear you. You matter." The ceremony was simple. A few dozen gathered, neighbors, teachers, artists, city officials. Malcolm gave a short speech. Amina read a poem. Amara, standing beneath her own painted likeness, looked out at the place where everything changed. "I was afraid of this park for a long time," she said, "but now, when I walk here, I see more than pain. I see people who didn't give up. I see what love can build." The mural stood not as a monument to trauma, but as a declaration of resilience. As the family walked away from the park, hand in hand, a small boy ran past them, laughing, his mother trailing behind. Amina turned to watch him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "What's next?" she asked her dad. Malcolm looked down at her, then ahead to the horizon. "We keep building," he said, "one day, one law, one heart at a time." They walked on as morning bathed the city in golden light. Behind them, the mural shimmered, and ahead of them, the world waited, still imperfect, still painful, but forever changed by the courage of two little girls who refused to be silent.